not everyone should hear what is about to be revealed. Some truths are too shattering, too sacred, and have remained hidden, whispered only behind sacred walls, protected by vows of silence. But now a testimony rises, a voice from Milan, a voice that crossed the edge of what is seen and what is eternal. It was a heavy autumn evening. The sky above Milan seemed swollen with something unspeakable, like a silence before the storm. Father Lorenzo, his name changed to protect his identity, was seated in the modest study behind the sacristy. His fingers moved slowly across the worn pages of his breviary, but his heart was elsewhere. There was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that makes even the strongest kneel. Then the phone rang, a mother sobbing, her voice barely coherent, pleaded for help. Her daughter, only 17, hadn't slept for weeks. She screamed when she saw a rosary. Her body contorted when exposed to anything sacred. Psychologists and doctors had seen her. None could explain her violent reactions. And then someone whispered the word most feared to say aloud: possession. Father Lorenzo wasn't new to such cases. He had been appointed an exorcist years before by the bishop after years of prayer, discernment, and training. But this case felt different. That night, as he prepared his crucifix and holy water, he felt a chilling intuition, as if stepping into a battle he could not retreat from. When he arrived at the family's home, he found the girl tied to her bed, eyes locked on the ceiling, motionless. She didn't scream, not at first, but the moment he stepped into the room wearing his stole, with holy water in hand, her body stiffened. And then a guttural voice, not her own, pierced the air. "Why did you come? She is mine. We saw her even in Medjugorje, but you understood nothing." The name, Medjugorje. No one in the room had mentioned it. Yet the entity, if it was indeed demonic, spoke it with hatred, as if it were a wound. During the exorcism, horrifying phrases and blasphemies poured from her mouth, mixed with cryptic messages. One phrase echoed repeatedly: "The woman disturbs us. She shines too much. Where she appears, we lose power." Father Lorenzo knew who the woman was. Mary, the same woman who appeared in Medjugorje under the name Queen of Peace. But why did darkness mention her in such a moment? Why fear a place many considered a site of peace and healing? As the ritual continued, the girl shrieked in unknown tongues, and though Father Lorenzo prayed fiercely, one question surged through his soul: what is really happening in Medjugorje? And why do the forces of darkness seem so afraid of it? Dear friend, if your heart is open, listen not just with your ears, but with your soul, because this story is more than just a testimony. It's a call, a divine invitation to awaken. And now, a special moment. If you've been touched by these words, we want to send you a personal blessing in our next video. Yes, your name and your city will be spoken aloud with love for thousands to hear, like a light shining in the darkness. Just comment your name and your city and leave a like. Imagine that. 1 minute of divine recognition. Your name echoing to the hearts of believers across the world. Be part of this movement of prayer and light. You are not just watching, you are part of the story. And yet, this was only the beginning. For what Father Lorenzo would face next would not only challenge his understanding of evil, it would bring him face to face with something sacred, powerful, and unimaginably real. The exorcism lasted over 5 hours. Time seemed to fold in on itself as prayers clashed against invisible walls, and the room grew dense with a presence so heavy it made the air itself feel like iron. The possessed girl would alternate between terrifying stillness and violent outbursts. Her voice shifted, from high-pitched screams to low, ancient growls that seemed to come from a place deeper than the human soul. And all the while, the name continued to echo through that room like a curse. Medjugorje, Medjugorje, she stands in our way. Father Lorenzo had encountered evil before, but never like this. The moment that name was spoken, it was as if a spiritual earthquake had cracked open under his feet. Medjugorje wasn't just a sacred site. According to the entity before him, it was a threat, a burning wound in the heart of darkness. The girl's body contorted with inhuman strength as Father Lorenzo prayed louder, his crucifix pressed against her forehead. But what shook him the most wasn't the violence. It was the fear he could feel from the other side, as if the very mention of the Virgin Mary and her apparitions in that small Bosnian village ignited agony within the darkness. The demon's voice hissed, "The woman shines too brightly. Where she walks, we are scattered. She breaks the chains. In Medjugorje we fall." He paused. This wasn't about superstition or mythology. This was something real, something far beyond the confines of rituals and doctrine. Later that night, after the girl had collapsed in exhaustion and the house was finally silent, Father Lorenzo sat alone in the chapel. Candlelight flickered across his tired face as he reviewed every word, every cry, every tremor. Over and over, one chilling question repeated in his mind. What power lies hidden in that mountain of apparitions that the forces of hell fear it so deeply? In the days that followed, Lorenzo began an intense personal investigation. He sought testimonies from other exorcists. He read unpublished letters, homilies, and confidential reports. What he discovered made his blood run cold, and his faith burned stronger. In France, a liberated woman had screamed during her final deliverance, "The Lady of Medjugorje chases us away." In Spain, a possessed teenager had only found peace when the word Gospa, the affectionate term for Mary in Bosnian, was whispered near his ear. But the most chilling story came from a Slovenian priest near Ljubljana. He recounted a session where a girl, with vacant eyes and cracked voice, had declared, "She stepped on Medjugorje. Since then, we can no longer rule the hearts that open there." Lorenzo's heart pounded. These weren't coincidences. These were fragments of a celestial plan, a divine strategy in a war most people didn't even realize was happening. Was the Virgin not just appearing, but establishing a stronghold, a lighthouse in the growing fog of spiritual emptiness? He knew what he had to do, not as a priest, not as an exorcist, but as a son with nothing but his rosary and a burning hunger for truth. Father Lorenzo packed his bag and made a decision. He would travel to Medjugorje. The journey was long, but felt strangely guided, as if an invisible hand cleared his path. When he finally arrived, it wasn't the expected miracles or grand signs that greeted him. It was something deeper, a silence so profound it rang in his ears. The air around the hill of apparitions was thick, but not with fear, with sacred presence. He stood before the statue of the Virgin, and he wept. For the first time in years, he didn't pray as a priest, but as a lost child. He felt stripped of his role, his title, even his strength. There was no need for words, only surrender. He knelt in the gravel, and in that holy silence, something pierced him, a warmth, a peace, and a sense that the battle was no longer just outside. It was within. He finally understood. It wasn't Medjugorje that threatened the darkness. It was what happened inside the human soul when it encountered the light. But what Father Lorenzo didn't yet realize was that his arrival there would set off a chain of events far more powerful than any exorcism he had ever performed, and far more dangerous. The first night in Medjugorje was wrapped in a sacred stillness. Father Lorenzo stayed at a modest guest house run by a local family. The room was simple, bare walls, a narrow bed, a wooden cross above the door, but the peace it radiated seeped into his soul like balm. For the first time in years, he felt quiet on the inside, as if the noise of his battles had been momentarily hushed. But peace can be deceptive. In the middle of the night, he awoke suddenly. He didn't know whether it was a dream or something more. He had seen her, a woman of light. She stood before him in silence, draped in a mantle of sky-blue light. Her face bathed in a softness not of this world. Her lips did not move, but her gaze, oh, her gaze, pierced through every doubt and every fear, unveiling layers of his soul he never dared look at before. Behind her, a multitude of souls floated like a river, some radiant, others cloaked in shadows, so thick they barely moved. And from her hands, beams of light pierced the darkness like swords of mercy, splitting the void with gentle violence. When he awoke, he was in tears. His heart was pounding, not in fear, but in awe. He felt broken, and at the same time, whole. That morning, he went to confession, not because of guilt, but because he needed to return to the essential, to empty his heart for whatever was coming. The priest who received him didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Those who come here searching for answers often leave with a mission." Those words etched themselves into Father Lorenzo's mind like fire. Later that day, he climbed the hill of apparitions once more. No crowds, only a few pilgrims praying quietly between the rocks. The sky was pale. The wind whispered like an ancient chant through the olive trees. Halfway up, he saw a woman kneeling on the side of the path, weeping uncontrollably. He approached her gently, kneeling beside her. Her face was tired but luminous, as if sorrow and hope were fighting for space in her heart. She looked up at him and whispered, "Father, my son tried to take his life 3 times. He stopped talking. He hated the world. But last night, here, he saw her, truly saw her. And this morning, he asked him to take him to confession." She didn't know anything about exorcisms, visions, or mystical dreams. But what she said struck Lorenzo like lightning. It wasn't about religious knowledge or tradition. It was about something real happening in hearts, shattered ones, wounded ones, right there on that hill. And then it happened, a voice within him, not heard with ears, but felt with the soul. A calling, a conviction, clear and undeniable. Go back, speak what you saw. Many are about to be deceived. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a mission, just like the priest had said the day before. He returned to Italy a few days later. Changed, filled not only with faith, but with fire. But what awaited him would shake the very foundation of everything he had just come to understand. A new case, a new battle. And this time, the darkness would fight back harder than ever before. The return to Milan felt like stepping through a veil. Something had shifted. Everything was the same, yet nothing was. The streets, the church, the quiet corridors of the parish all looked familiar. But his soul was now aligned to something far greater, far heavier. He had barely set foot inside his office when the phone rang again. A nun, Sister Chiara, was calling from a center for troubled youth. Her voice trembled. "Padre, I need your help. It's happening again." A 22-year-old girl named Martina had arrived at the shelter only months before. Her life had been marked by violence, addiction, and deep immersion in occult practices. But now, something darker had surfaced. She screamed during Massachusetts. She refused the Eucharist with visible hatred. She uttered words in ancient languages no one understood. And the final sign came 3 nights ago, during a moment of prayer in front of a statue of the Virgin of Medjugorje. She collapsed, and when she woke, she laughed. A laugh so piercing, so unnatural, that it froze the blood in Sister Chiara's veins. Then came the words, "You cannot save me with her. Not here. Not now. You don't know who's watching from that hill." That sentence sent a shiver down Father Lorenzo's spine. Someone was watching. From the hill, another allusion to Medjugorje, another demonic reaction to the Queen of Peace. He wasted no time. When he arrived, Martina was sitting in the corner of a small room, her eyes glassy, her body trembling like a trapped animal. She didn't speak, didn't move, until he approached with a small medal of the Virgin from Medjugorje. Then she stiffened. Her eyes rolled back, and a guttural voice erupted from deep within. "She haunts me. She stole them from me. She burns." From that moment on, the spiritual warfare began in earnest. Every exorcism session revealed a new layer of darkness. But one pattern became terrifyingly clear. Whenever Medjugorje was mentioned, the reactions were violent, almost unbearable. The demon shrieked. She doesn't only speak to visionaries. She comes in dreams. She calls in silence. And you don't listen. Father Lorenzo began to realize something staggering. Mary was not only appearing, she was preparing. She was gathering a silent army. Souls awaken in the night, hearts stirred by visions, whispers, dreams, and callings no human voice could manufacture. But then the question took root. Who was this girl? A victim or a vessel? Had she been chosen to reveal something hidden, something far bigger than any exorcism? He had no answer, only prayer. And in those hours of relentless battle of sweat, tears, and whispered Hail Marys, a strange peace would sometimes descend in the room. a silence that felt like heaven standing guard. And in those moments, Lorenzo knew he was not alone. Folded hands, and now, dear one, if you are reading or listening with a heart open to the mystery of heaven, we invite you to do something simple but sacred. If these words have touched your soul, even just a little, leave an amen in the comments, not out of routine, not for show, but as a sign of surrender, as a whisper to heaven that your heart is awake, that your soul is listening, because heaven is watching. And yes, the Queen of Peace is calling. But what happened next would tear the veil between the visible and invisible wider than ever before. 3 days passed. No sign of Martina. No message. No witness. No trace of where she had gone. The center had been locked from the inside. No one had seen her leave. But in the morning, her bed was empty. The only thing out of place was the image of the Virgin of Medjugorje that had hung above her bed, now found face down on the floor. Not broken. Not damaged, just reversed, as if something or someone had turned it away in defiance. Father Lorenzo sat alone in the chapel for hours. His heart was heavy, but a strange clarity pulsed through him. He knew this disappearance wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and he was right. 3 days later, he found a letter, placed directly on the altar of the church where he celebrated daily mass. The handwriting was shaky, the paper slightly crumpled, but the words carved themselves into his soul. Father, I've been taken to a place I can't describe. I saw fire and ice blend into one. I heard screams that didn't sound human. But then, among the shadows, a light. She appeared. She didn't speak, but her eyes looked into mine, and I saw everything. My sin, my chains, and my forgiveness. I understood the war isn't outside. It's inside. Don't come looking for me. I'll return when I am free. Father Lorenzo read the letter again, and again. Each time, his hands trembled a little more. Had she undergone a mystical experience? Was she still lost between two worlds? But it was the final lines that pierced deepest. She told me even priests must convert. That wearing the cloth is not enough. That evil hides in comfort. Father, she chose you. He dropped the letter, not out of fear, but out of understanding. This was no longer about rescuing a tormented soul. This was a divine summons. To him, to every priest, to every believer who had grown cold in their faith, blind to the spiritual war unfolding silently around them. That night, during Eucharistic adoration, Father Lorenzo fell to his knees, and he wept, not out of despair, but out of awareness. The mission given to him was no longer just to fight evil in its loudest forms. It was to awaken the sleeping, to tear away the illusion that faith is comfort, and remind the world that Mary, Queen of Peace, does not appear to soothe our slumber, but to prepare us for battle. From that day forward, everything changed. He began to preach with boldness. He spoke not of dogma, but of truth, not of rules, but of rescue. He spoke of a queen who wages war with light. And the people began to listen. But the true test of his calling, the trial that would shake him to core, was still waiting just beyond the veil, a veil that was about to be torn. Weeks passed in silence. No news from Martina, no apparitions, no new cases, just a slow rhythm of parish life and the weight of unanswered questions. But silence doesn't mean absence. One cold December afternoon, during a quiet weekday mass in a small chapel in the heart of Milan, a woman walked in. She sat at the very back, wrapped in a dark coat. She kept her eyes fixed on the altar. She didn't move for communion. She didn't kneel. She didn't speak. But when the mass ended, she rose slowly and walked toward the front. Father Lorenzo's breath caught in his chest. It was her, Martina, but different. Gone was the haunted stare, the trembling hands, the invisible chains. Her eyes now shimmered with something he hadn't seen before. Peace. Fragile, yes, but real, alive. She approached him quietly and said, "Father, may I confess?" Her voice was calm, yet filled with emotion. And when she knelt before him, her words flowed, not in torment, but in truth. I didn't just see the darkness. I understood it. It hides in the moments we forget who we are, It creeps in when we stop fighting. But she never left me, not for a second. Martina spoke of visions beyond comprehension, cities covered in dark fog, houses alight with prayer like torches in the night, families holding hands, priests on their knees, and then the voice, soft, maternal, full of fire and tenderness. My heart will triumph, but only if you allow it. Not all signs will be accepted. Some will be mocked, but those who listen will be light for the others. Father Lorenzo felt something ignite in his chest. This wasn't a girl recovering from trauma. This was a witness, a soul chosen to carry something divine into the world. And through her, he understood the true face of evil isn't always loud or monstrous. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's spiritual sleep. And Medjugorje wasn't just a place. It was a summons, a cry for daily conversion, for prayer, for waking up. From that day on, Martina returned often to the chapel, not as a spectacle, not seeking attention. She knelt in silence, sometimes for hours, before the same image of Mary that once made her scream. Now she wept in gratitude, and in her quiet transformation, Father Lorenzo saw the miracle, not flashing lights, not supernatural theatrics, but the rebirth of a soul, a real resurrection. And he knew it was time to speak, to write, to share, even if it cost him his reputation, even if people mocked or accused him of madness, because the truth he had witnessed was too sacred to hide, and silence in the face of light is complicity with the dark. And if you felt this truth stir in your heart too, I want to ask something simple but meaningful. Leave a like on this video if your heart has been touched by this story, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a single testimony of light. When you click like, you help more souls see what maybe they didn't know they were searching for. And when you subscribe, you become part of family, a spiritual movement that believes the Queen of Peace is not just appearing, she is awakening us. But the fiercest test of faith, the one that would bring Father Lorenzo to the edge of everything he believed, was still waiting. And it was closer than he ever imagined. The days that followed moved slowly, like candle wax dripping in silence. But something had changed. Word of Father Lorenzo's testimony began to spread, not through headlines or viral clips, but heart to heart, prayer to prayer, whispers in confessionals, quiet conversations after Massachusetts. A spark had been lit, and it refused to be extinguished. He never sought fame. He didn't want cameras or spotlights. He only spoke when he sensed that a soul was truly ready to hear. And when he did, he spoke with reverence, but also with certainty, because he had seen. And once you see, you cannot unsee. One evening, during a small catechesis in a dimly lit chapel, he looked into the eyes of a dozen faithful and said, "We are no longer in the time of curiosity. We are in the time of decision. Medjugorje is not just a grace. It is a responsibility. She is preparing us, guiding us. But are we truly listening?" No one answered, not out of indifference, but because deep inside they knew. Every word struck like a bell in their conscience. Letters began to arrive from all over. Some were from people who had never stepped foot in Medjugorje, yet dreamed of the Virgin. Others heard her voice during moments of despair. Some were mothers praying for their lost children. Others were elderly asking for one last chance to reconcile with God. One letter, in particular, stood out, written in trembling hand, anonymous. "Father, I never believed in anything. But after hearing what you said about Medjugorje, something inside me shattered. I cry and don't know why. But I know I have to return. I don't know where, but I know I have to come back." Lorenzo smiled, not because it was dramatic, but because he knew that return was not to a location. It was to the soul. That was the real meaning of the apparitions. Not a spectacle to witness, but a call to embrace. In recent times, he felt Mary's presence more strongly, not as a vision, but as a gentle pressure, like a hand on his back urging him forward in moments of doubt. She was loving but unrelenting, tender but immovable, because the Queen of Peace had not come to lull us into spiritual comfort. She had come to wake us up. And so, the Exorcist from Milan continued, speaking not of fear, but of love, not of the devil, but of the victory that is already written, not to glorify darkness, but to reveal the light that breaks it. Because when heaven speaks, the soul cannot remain silent. If you've listened this far with your heart open, this story is no longer just a story. It's a seed, and maybe that seed has just been planted inside you. If you believe in the triumph of light, if you feel that this call has touched something eternal in you, comment below, Jesus is the King, not just as a phrase, but as a declaration, a whisper of truth that cuts through the noise of the world. And if you want to continue this path, if your soul is hungry for more revelations, then don't stop here. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now, because the next story may reveal something that your heart has been longing for, a truth hidden in plain sight, a voice from heaven you were born to hear. May the Queen of Peace walk beside you, and may your heart never close again to the light.